On 3 platforms. Welcome everyone to another weekly live stream with yours truly, Dr. Sarah L. Webb. Today we're responding to the question, what does colorism in the workplace look like? How can we start to identify and recognize colorism in companies, businesses, sports, schools, institutions, organizations, government, and other types of locations? Today I'm sharing one of the most common and most obvious ways that colorism manifests in our workplaces and in other arenas of our life. Before I jump into the content though, you know how we go. Say hello in the chat. Let me know where you're tuning in from. If you're new here, I am Dr. Sarah Webb, the founder of Colorism Healing, and I've been doing these live streams every Monday at noon Central Time, and they are based on a series called Corporate Colorism, why business leaders must upgrade their anti-racist strategies. I do like interactive live, so I'll be saving time at the end for questions and comments. Feel free to chat with me along the way. I will prioritize questions, so if you have a question, make sure to use question marks so that when I get to that segment of the live, I can easily spot your questions. And if you haven't seen the previous live streams or the previous blog posts and articles, you can find replays and recordings of what I've talked about, not only this year, but in years past, because I've been doing this for a long time, on YouTube, LinkedIn, and even on Instagram, okay? So let's dive in deeper to this question. Is your workplace guilty of monochromatic diversity? So without being proactive in addressing colorism, because when I talk to companies and organizations and groups, there are always people in the audience who have not heard of colorism, right? And so if companies or schools or teams, boards and organizations are not actively addressing colorism, if they're not proactively and intentionally addressing colorism, then they run the risk of creating what I call monochromatic diversity. Okay, this is a term that I made up. In past live streams, I've talked about being a word nerd, and I love living language. I love how language evolves and how we can shape and mold language to help us articulate our reality. And so I don't remember when I learned of the phrase monochromatic, but it's most often applied to art and design, right? And so in an art and design context, the word monochromatic refers to a color scheme that is the same color or various shades of the same color, right? So various shades of blue or various shades of pink, right? Or just all pink. And so monochromatic diversity happens when a group is racially and ethnically diverse, and yet all the members of that group tend to have the same or very similar skin tones, okay? So let me know, based on that definition, right, where you do have people of different races, you have people of different ethnicities, but yet they all have pretty much lighter skin tones. They all, as someone mentioned, various shades of beige, right? Have you seen that? Whether it be at your school, whether it be on a dance team or in a league or in leadership or some other organization or entity that you belong to or that you have interacted with, right? Let me know the context in which you might have seen monochromatic diversity happening and taking place. And so monochromatic diversity typically happens because of a combination of factors, right? There are multiple factors that create this monochromatic diversity. One thing I'll say is that a lot of people report seeing more monochromatic diversity the higher up the organizational chart you get, right? And so a lot of times entry-level employers or junior employees, a lot of frontline workers tend to have a wider range of skin tones than managers, supervisors, directors, heads of departments, people in C-suite or executive roles. The higher up the organizational chart you go, the more people see monochromatic diversity, where even if you have, again, an executive or a senior manager or a vice president who is Black or Hispanic or Hispanic or Asian, they are very likely to be on the lighter side of the skin tone spectrum, right? And so 3 reasons that monochromatic diversity tends to happen is, one, very obviously there is biases in hiring and promotion. So when people are up for a job, when they're up for promotions, whether it be internally or across different companies, people have positive biases in favor of those with lighter skin tones and negative biases against those with darker skin tones. And so that's one of the reasons why we might see people of the same skin tone, even if they have different racial and ethnic identities. A second reason that monochromatic diversity happens a lot is because of the impact of colorism in the school to workforce pipeline, right? We very often talk about the school to prison pipeline, but there's also a school to workforce pipeline. And because of colorism happening in that pipeline system, it bolsters the opportunities for lighter skinned people as they advance through their careers and seek out job opportunities. And it disproportionately places obstacles and hurdles before darker skinned people as they're trying to pursue their education and seeking out career and job opportunities. And then a third one, though, that is really important and why monochromatic diversity happens so often is that standard practices for collecting demographic data, right? So job application forms, testing forms, school application forms, medical and hospital forms, right? Where we check boxes for race and ethnicity, but we don't have any methods or common practices for collecting data on the intersection of skin tone, right? And so a lot of companies, based on those checkbox identities, based on the demographic data that they do collect and that they do measure, looking at, what is your race? Are you Black or African American? Are you of Hispanic or Latino origin, right? So all those checkboxes that we are used to filling out, they obscure the differences in skin tone. And so on paper, if you're just looking at that data, on paper, a company or a school or an organization, an entity might perceive themselves as being very diverse. They might perceive themselves as having achieved certain milestones in terms of their diversity goals or their, metrics and their numbers. And yet what we see on paper is not necessarily what we see when we're in the room, when we're at the table, when we're looking at the company website, right? So it's fine if your numbers look great, but what happens when I actually show up to the workforce? What happens when I join the company Zoom meeting, right? Then what do the faces of those people actually look like? And so those are, 3 things we have to consider when we see something like monochromatic diversity happening. And because of our failure to address colorism in society, as well as in all the different parts of society, right? Again, such as in education, healthcare, policing and law, the workplace, corporate America, and things like that. We have not seen the strides in equity and justice and diversity and inclusion that we could see, that we should be seeing. Because I've said it before, but it bears repeating. If we don't address colorism, the impact of racial progress is not evenly distributed across the race, right? Across an entire ethnic group of people. And it often only is benefiting any type of racial progress or social justice progress has disproportionately benefited those on the lightest skin tone side of the skin tone spectrum. And those with darker skin tones have not received the same degree of improvement or the same degree of advancement, if any improvement and advancement at all. And so when we look at the numbers and why the needle has been moving so slowly over the years in terms of equity across society, across the globe, it's because we're missing colorism. Colorism is a key lever that we need to be adjusting and addressing in order to see the strides in racial progress and, social justice around historically marginalized racial and ethnic groups. And again, if we don't do this, if we don't look at equity and justice through the lens of colorism, the social hierarchy will literally look the same as it does now, right? So right now, those with the lightest skin tones, the straightest hair textures, the thinnest features are at the top of the hierarchy. And present day, we often call those people white. We have racially categorized those people as white. But even if we don't use those racial categories, the same will be true regardless if we don't address colorism. I mentioned in a recent Instagram post that not addressing colorism and only focusing on race or only focusing on ethnicity is simply creating an opportunity for a new cohort of light-skinned people to rise to the top of the social hierarchy, okay? So that's my little spiel for today. I kept it pretty short, and so last time I ran out of time to answer your questions and look at all your wonderful comments, which I really appreciate. So I'm going to do that now. And last time I started on Instagram, so I'm going to start with questions and comments on LinkedIn and YouTube first. Sheila, how you doing? Sheila from the DMV area. Welcome. New here. Yeah, I'm glad you're new here. Let me know if you have any questions. Welcome, Danielle. Great to see you again. LinkedIn user says, yes, my workplace is monochromatic diverse. Okay, so for some reason it's not showing me your actual name, LinkedIn user, so I apologize for that. But, there's someone here on LinkedIn saying they're in a workplace that has monochromatic diversity, especially, when you look at who's represented who's the face of the company, right? And that's another thing to consider too. Who's the face of the company? Who's representing the company? A lot of times they are lighter skinned people. Nina Golgi says, so glad I made it. Yay, with the tea and the flowers. Welcome, Nina. Hey, Zephrine. Zephrine says, I appreciate the term monochromatic diversity. Yay for word nerds. Hey, in the house. All right. All right, cool. So let's look over to Instagram. There were no questions on LinkedIn or YouTube today. So if you have something in the queue, drop it in the chat while I go over to Instagram, my lovely Instagram peeps. I'll scroll back up. And let's see, am I going all the way up or not? Hey, Michelle, welcome. All right, JB1710. Issa Trey says, ooh, okay. Nah, I'm just pretty. It's so good. I miss you too. Great to see you, Lavonda. Dr. Webb, miss you too, beautiful. Issa Trey says, I work in higher ed. It's so interesting that this is exactly what their diversity looks like. It's monochromatic, but in the lighter shade range, right? So it's not just that it's monochromatic, it's that it's monochromatic usually towards the lighter side of the human skin tone spectrum. So thank you for sharing those experiences. Let's see. Deep House Nation says, in law, don't get me started on what their spouses look like. Well, Deep House Nation, go ahead and say what you have to say about that. That is definitely a thing. Issa Trey says, on paper, they're black. In person and pictures, they're mostly light-skinned, biracial, or multiracial, but only ID as black demographically, even though 2 or more races as an election is there. Yeah, that's, I think, a discussion that now I think it's productive. I'll just quickly say this. I think it's productive for us to question racial categories that were created by white supremacist capitalist patriarchs. And so a lot of people push back on those who are, questioning, should we continue to consider mixed race people as just black, the way it happened during slavery, right, in the United States. Now, other countries around the world didn't necessarily use that practice. A lot of countries had a wider range of racial categories, but in the United States in particular, we've really held to the one-drop rule. And because of the source of the one-drop rule, because of the purpose of the one-drop rule, I think it's actually healthy for us to be questioning the usefulness of that. And if you choose to continue using the one-drop rule, I think you have to be intentional and very clear about why, and not just passively accepting it because that's the way things have always been done in this country. Now I'm just pretty says, I love the school to workforce point. Yeah, so the colorism starts so early, and last week I talked about the compounding impact of privilege. So if a dark-skinned child is, unfairly failed or held back in kindergarten, I mean, they're already being set up, for a certain trajectory that is going to could potentially impact their workforce outcomes, right? It doesn't always necessarily mean that they can't be successful later on in life, but the point is that they will face greater discrimination and greater obstacles and hurdles because of that, right? And on the other side, a light-skinned child who's given more attention, who's given more assistance, who's given more grace, who's not overly disciplined in the classroom, right? They are increasing their odds over time from year to year to be successful in school and to have more career opportunities. Even thinking about who gets picked for mentorship opportunities, who gets pulled out of class for certain school clubs, or who gets elected for things. All of this resume building and the skills that you produce and the opportunities that come have a really long-lasting compounding impact that starts early on. But even looking at just the workforce, so once people enter the workforce, the same is true, right? And so going back to the mentorship and the sponsorship thing, if you are taking light-skinned people under your wing and showing them the ropes and giving them the inside scoop and inviting them into rooms and spaces and inviting them to dinner at your house and, letting them see behind the curtain, and you're not embracing and supporting darker skinned employees and colleagues in the same way, then you're essentially creating the same issue in terms of the pipeline to leadership or the pipeline to senior management, right? And so even thinking about not just being hired on the front end, but what's the trajectory of your promotion and your ability to succeed and advance your career even once you enter the workforce. Okay. Hey, Aya, welcome. Yay. Satia, it's good to see you again. Yay. Okay, so question from Danielle. How do employees support a movement without fear of being pushed of jobs in each level of corporate? I am a solopreneur, so I can use my voice easier. Capitalism versus colorism. Well, then thank you, Danielle, for adding that nuance, right? And so a lot of times, you said it, Danielle. I think you're alluding to one option or one possibility. And I am invited to speak a lot of times because the outside person sometimes can help to say things and help to introduce concepts and frameworks from a place of greater safety than internal employees, right? And so that is one way that employees can support a movement. If you feel like it's unsafe for you within the organization to say these things or to raise these conversations, then you can start by pointing to outside people who can do some of the heavy lifting for you, right? In a way that is less risky for them or for you. But also this is where our allies come in and accomplices come in. And so we have a lot of light-skinned people, for example, who get promoted. And I've talked to light-skinned people who say they were up for promotion or up for being able to get a different position. And there was a dark-skinned counterpart who was also up for that same position. And they were told by the darker skin counterpart, oh, well, they're probably going to give it to you. You're likely to get it. And so the lighter skin person did get it. And so sometimes, it is harder for the more marginalized people, the people who are experiencing the colorism or whatever the form of oppression is, to have to endure that oppression and simultaneously be solely responsible for speaking up about it and educating people about it. And so a lot of times you'll have a light skin accomplice or ally who's able to make choices and make decisions in terms of sponsorship versus mentorship to say, I'm going to purposely invite Dr. Webb into this space, or I'm going to not just put out a call for this promotion or put out a call for this opportunity, but I'm actually going to nominate darker skinned individuals, and I'm actually going to hire dark skinned consultants, and I'm actually going to with their permission, actually assign them to things that can advance their career or give them greater educational and professional development opportunities, right? And I say with their permission because sometimes promotion and advancement comes with also greater responsibility and burden, right? But if they are interested, if they are ambitious and they want to move their career in that direction, then you take it upon yourself as a non-Black person, as a white person, as some other lighter skinned BIPOC person, or a mixed race, multi-racial, whatever your form of privilege is, you leverage that to be able to be in the room and making decisions that are going to impact darker skinned people. Great question, Danielle. Larissa says, hello, Dr. Webb. I'm late to the party, but happy to hop on before the live is over. Welcome, Larissa. I'm so glad you could join us. Thank you for adding critical thinking to the colorism conversation. Yes, it is my Gemini, my Mercury and Gemini energy. I can't help but to be analytical. Okay, so back to but also back to Instagram. Black Urbanist. Hey, it's good to see you again. Thanks for giving us a word, trying to help folks understand they can't stop at hiring me. See, this is exactly what I was just saying. Black Urbanist. Because if you're a lighter skinned person, you have to acknowledge that you are more likely to be given an opportunity or to be hired or to be promoted. And so, one, you can, in some instances, say, actually, I want to nominate this darker skinned person instead, right? So that is something that light skinned people can do, is say, I know you nominated me for this opportunity, but I actually think my darker skin, you don't have to use the word darker skin colleague, but in your mind, this is what you're saying. I think my darker skin colleague, has actually been more qualified and can speak more to the issue that this position addresses, right? And so even if people open the door for you as a light-skinned person, you can choose to step aside and invite a darker-skinned person in instead. And this might step on some toes, but I will say that I've had a lot of light-skinned people tell me that they were surprised that they were given opportunities, or they were like, oh my gosh, they had this like imposter syndrome, or did they really give me this opportunity because I deserved it, or did I work as hard as everyone else? And I was saying that as a dark skinned person, there's never been a question. Usually the darker skinned person is overqualified if they're given an opportunity, right? Because of needing to overcome the biases, because of needing to overcome people's colorism, you are very often exceedingly qualified for the positions that you do get as a dark-skinned person. And so don't think that it's a compromise between diversity versus excellence. That conversation comes up a lot. They're like, oh, well, if we, focus on giving these opportunities to dark-skinned people, then what about those who are really qualified for the position? What if we're just looking for the quote unquote best person for the job? And so anyone who might be pushing back because of that, just know that for a dark-skinned person to even be in front of you anyway, that they are likely more than qualified for the job. And Deep House Nation says, facts. We've never had a, quote, black president, and all 3 black Supreme Court justices have had non-black spouses at some points. This topic runs very deep. Yeah, and it is a politic, right? Our romantic choices, especially in terms of the conversation around marriage specifically, because marriage is a legal institution that has many ramifications in terms of social capital, right? And financial capital and things like that. It is a politic. There is a politic behind it, whether we like to think of it or not. We always want to romanticize marriage as being, oh, it's just about 2 people getting together and falling in love. But historically speaking, around the globe, marriage has always been so much more than that, right? And that's just a historic reality. All right, folks. So I think I've gotten through all the questions on both platforms. Oh, wait, no. Here's Sharon Porter. I got a few more things coming in. Let me see what Sharon's asking on LinkedIn. It's challenging because families and peers perpetuate the value of being lighter skinned. How do we begin to change perspectives of the older generation? How can we open the eyes of those in power? Yes. And then I'm going to add to that Danielle's comment. Silent generation of my family said work 3 times as much or for a fraction. Also the Creole paper bag still existing. Yes. So looking at how do we begin to change perspectives of the older generation, and how can we open the eyes of those in power? And this will be the last question I take, so I think it's a good one. One, the age of a person does not necessarily indicate their willingness or their interest to learn, right? And so I said this like a year ago, where we oftentimes try to excuse bad behavior or problematic behavior by saying, oh, well, they're from a different generation, or, well, that's just based on the time that they're from. But there are people from those same older generations who don't think like that, who don't perpetuate those problematic behaviors, right? So the generation you're from, the age that you are, is not a hall pass to perpetuate harmful stereotypes or perpetuate harmful behaviors. And so we have to understand that regardless of age, we all have to constantly be learning. And so anyone who's in that state of, yes, I'm going to continue to learn, those are the people I like to invest my time into. Those are the people I like to invest my energy into, because there is a swath of people, a group of people who don't want to learn. And that happens at every age, right? There are people who are going to be willfully ignorant. There are people who are going to dig their heels in and not engage in the conversation, who don't care about new research, who don't care about new insights, who don't care about broadening their perspectives at any age. And so to those people, if they come across a live that I do, if they happen to come across this content, that's great. But I focus on people of any age who are curious. I focus on people of any age who at least are humble enough to know that they don't know everything, who are humble enough to ask, well, what am I not seeing? And so in terms of being effective and efficient with our energy and our resources, whether it be financial resources, time resources, intellectual, emotional, spiritual resources, I say look for the people who are primed and ready to receive new insight and information, because we don't need everyone to understand. We don't need everyone to buy in or be on board. We simply need a critical mass of people. We simply need enough people to change the tide. And that doesn't require everyone, right? And so I'm saying this as a strategy to help you all have strategy in terms of your own activism, in terms of your own social advocacy, in terms of your own allyship or accomplishship, is that if you set the goal that everyone in this company, or that everyone in this neighborhood, or that everyone in this family, or that everyone in this planet has to be on board, or has to agree, or has to think and feel the way I do, then you're setting yourself up for burnout. You're setting yourself up for disappointment. You're setting yourself up to give up pretty early in the game, because you're going to quickly realize that that's just not a reasonable goal. And so for anyone who's thinking about generational differences, there are people in every generation who you're not going to reach, and there are people in every generation who you will reach. And so really quickly, 2 things you can do is start the conversation with the question, have you heard of colorism? And then their response to that is going to tell you everything you need to know about how to proceed or how not to proceed, right? And so one, if they say they've never heard of colorism, you proceed by sharing what you know. You don't have to give a whole sermon or a whole lecture to share what you know, and then ask them, does that sound familiar? Is that something you've ever encountered before? And again, listen to how they respond. Pay attention to how they respond. And you can know, is this someone that I can engage and influence in terms of helping to create change in this organization, or helping to create change in this family, right? Or is this someone who's belligerent? Is this someone who's not open, not ready to receive, at least not at this moment? And I need to then divert my energy, my valuable, precious energy and resources to finding other people who are ready and primed to engage in this conversation. And so with that, I know I have a few more comments that just came in, but I am going to wrap it up because we only have a couple minutes left. And so I want to leave you, if you're just tuning in, we've been talking about monochromatic diversity as one of the common ways that colorism shows up in the workplace or in schools, in, leagues and dance teams and churches and just pretty much anywhere in society where there's a group of people. Even if they have racial and ethnic diversity, a lot of times those people, especially those once we get into the leadership level, tend to be lighter skinned and be on the lighter side of the human skin tone spectrum. And so your homework, one assignment that I have, if you're interested in how to take action on what I've been talking about today, is identify instances of monochromatic diversity. So that's the first thing, is do I see it? Because too often we're not even seeing it. Too often people will say, oh, I didn't even notice that, or oh, I didn't even recognize that, right? So start to practice recognizing colorism when you see it, specifically monochromatic diversity. And then step two is to identify the person most likely to create change. So let me give you an example. If you're a school teacher, and you see monochromatic diversity in the school administration or in the school board, right? Identify the person who is most likely to influence that situation. Or if you are a principal of a school and you're newly hired at that school and you're like, oh wow, all the teachers, we have teachers of different races and we have administrators of different races, but they all are very light skinned. Then you can create changes in the protocols, the practices, and the policies in terms of hiring and promotion going forward, right? Or if you are the coach of a dance team or the coach of a cheerleading team or the assistant coach or a parent, if you're a parent who, is signing your child up for cheerleading and you see, well, all the cheerleaders on this squad are very light skinned, right? Or, non-black, right? Then talk to the coach. Have that conversation with that coach. Have that conversation with the other parents and say, I'm noticing this. Have you noticed this? Do you know if there's a reason why this monochromatic diversity exists, right? So 2 parts. 1, start to notice things. And then 2, start to identify the person that you need to talk to about what you're seeing. And then your affirmation I'm leaving with you for this week is I am becoming more aware of colorism and I practice speaking up about it. Right? And so depending on where you are in your journey, you might still be at the phase of, well, I'm just going to start getting used to seeing it and recognizing it and knowing for sure that this is what colorism is. Because sometimes you have to feel sure for yourself that this is colorism. You feel confident in explaining how and why it's colorism before you actually then take that to someone else. But wherever you are, I appreciate you for leaning into the process. I appreciate you for being here for these conversations like this every Monday at noon Central Time. And I appreciate the way you all engage with each other in the chat. Thank you so, so much for helping me spread this awareness. Thank you so much for helping me shift attitudes and take action to dismantle colorism. I will see you all next week. What am I talking about next week? I didn't list out my topic ahead of time, but it's going to be continuing the series of what colorism looks like in our organizations, businesses, schools, clubs, and various institutions. Okay? Much love and enjoy the rest of your week, everybody.